Everyone speaks of Dracula, the Impaler prince who struck terror into his enemies. But almost no one dares whisper of his love life, the wives and mistresses who shared his dark throne. Behind the blood-soaked legend of Vlad Tepes stand women whose stories are just as chilling and far more forgotten. He had 3 wives, each one bound to him by power, passion, or fate. One chose death over dishonor, throwing herself into the river rather than fall into enemy hands. Another gave him heirs, including a son remembered as Minea the Evil. And one sealed his destiny through marriage to the Hungarian crown, a bond that ended in betrayal. These women were more than shadows in Dracula's castle. They were survivors, rulers, and makers of his legacy. Stay with me until the end, and you will find out Dracula's true love that nobody knows about. Welcome to ScaryDrac. If you love dark history and Gothic secrets, like this video and join us. The chronicles of Wallachia are heavy with tales of cruelty and blood, yet hidden in their shadows lies the story of a woman history has nearly erased. Her name was Anastasia-Maria Holszanska, remembered in whispers as Knezna Bathory of Transylvania, the first bride of Vlad Tepes. She was born into a powerful Transylvanian noble family, a woman of bloodlines that stretched into the mighty Bathory clan. The Bathorys were feared and admired, a dynasty whose name would one day be forever linked with cruelty through Countess Elizabeth Bathory, the Blood Countess. But long before that legend, Anastasia entered the world of Vlad Dracula. The match was not one of love, but of politics. Vlad needed allies, and Transylvania offered him both influence and protection. Anastasia was young, noble, and accustomed to the intrigues of courts, where daggers were often hidden beneath velvet sleeves. When she became the wife of the Prince of Wallachia, she stepped into a realm ruled not by reason, but by terror. Imagine her first days in his fortress, the looming walls of Poenari rising above the Argesh River, the forests below echoing with wolves. She did not marry a man of gentle words. She married a warlord, one who had spent his youth in captivity under the Ottomans, forged in fire and revenge. His heart was not soft, but carved from the same stone as the mountains around them. And yet, he trusted her enough to give her his name, his lineage, and eventually his heirs. Together, Vlad and Anastasia had 2 sons, Radu and Vlad. They were born not into peace, but into a kingdom at war, a land where fathers returned home blood-stained, and children learned that loyalty was bought with cruelty. For Anastasia, motherhood was no shield from horror. Raising princes in the shadow of the Impaler was a role steeped in dread. She was tasked not only with giving Vlad heirs, but with ensuring their survival in a world where betrayal lurked in every banquet hall. But what did she think of her husband's rule? Of the forests of the impaled, the grotesque spectacles meant to terrify invading armies? No chronicle records her words. History left her voiceless. And perhaps that silence is the most chilling thing of all. Did she fear him as his enemies did? Or did she stand at his side, sharing in his vision of ruling through terror? The marriage between Anastasia and Vlad was more than personal. It was symbolic. By uniting with a Bathory, Vlad tied himself to one of the most infamous bloodlines in Europe. It gave him legitimacy among Transylvanian nobles and strengthened his claim to rule Wallachia. Anastasia, meanwhile, gained a throne, though it was a throne built on rivers of blood. Little is known of how her life ended. Some say she died quietly, overshadowed by her husband's monstrous fame. Others suggest her fate was harsher, erased deliberately from chronicles that sought to make Vlad the sole figure of fear. But her presence lingers in the legacy of her children. Her son Vlad bore his father's name, and her son Radu carried forward the line. Anastasia-Maria Holszanska was not a bride of romance, nor a queen remembered for kindness. She was the first woman to walk into the darkness of Vlad's world and call it home. A woman bound to a man who would one day be known not simply as a prince, but as the living image of Dracula. Her story is like a locked room in a ruined fortress. The walls still stand, the air is thick with ghosts, but the truth is hidden behind shadows. Yet one thing is certain, without her, the Impaler's bloodline would have withered. She gave him heirs, she gave him legitimacy, and she gave herself to the darkness. And in the Gothic silence of history, she waits, the first wife of Dracula, the forgotten queen of shadows. If Anastasia was the forgotten key that first opened the gates to Vlad's dynasty, then Jusztina Szilágyi was the chain that bound him deeper into the politics of Eastern Europe. She was not merely a wife. She was the bridge between Vlad the Impaler and the powerful Hungarian and Moldavian nobility, a bond that brought him both strength and ruin. Jusztina was born into the house of Szilágyi, kin to one of the most formidable rulers of the age, Matthias Corvinus, King of Hungary. The Szilágyi bloodline was one of cunning diplomats and warlords, and through this marriage, Vlad was tied to Hungary itself. At a time when Wallachia was a fragile land, torn between the crushing weight of the Ottoman Empire and the hungry ambitions of its neighbors, Jusztina's marriage to Vlad was not romance, it was survival. Picture her entering his fortress, a bride stepping into a court already steeped in whispers of impalement, cruelty, and vengeance. Where others trembled at Vlad's name, she walked forward with the steel composure of a noblewoman trained in the arts of diplomacy. She had grown up among lords and kings, and she knew that power often wore a mask of horror. With Jusztina, Vlad found a partner who gave him not only prestige, but also heirs. Their union produced two sons, Mihail and Minea, later remembered in history as Minea the Evil. That name, Minea the Evil, would echo like a curse through the centuries, carrying forward the cruelty that had already stained his father's name. Through Jusztina, the legacy of blood did not end. It multiplied, but what of Jusztina herself? What did she endure as Vlad's consort? To be the Impaler's wife was to live in a world where trust was a fragile thing, where walls could whisper with betrayal, and where death often came quicker than dawn. She was the mother of princes, but she was also the silent witness to her husband's descent deeper into shadows. The marriage bound Vlad closer to Hungary, yet this bond proved treacherous. For it was King Matthias Corvinus, Jusztina's own kinsman, who would one day imprison Vlad. Imagine her torment. A wife caught between loyalty to her husband and the chains of blood that tied her to Hungary's throne. Did she plead for his freedom? Did she curse her own family's betrayal? Or did she, like so many of the women bound to the Impaler, simply vanish into the shadows, her voice swallowed by the silence of history? Jusztina gave Vlad heirs who would carry forward his name, and perhaps even his darkness. But she also stood at the crossroads of his destiny. Through her, Vlad was elevated, a prince tied by marriage to powerful allies. Yet through her, he was also betrayed. Her son, Minea the Evil, would one day claim the throne of Wallachia. He ruled with the same iron cruelty as his father, earning a name nearly as dark as Vlad's. And though Jusztina's own fate remains veiled in mystery, her legacy lived on in the blood of her children. Blood that carried terror, cruelty, and power through another generation. Jusztina Szilágyi was not a tragic maiden leaping to her death, nor a forgotten ghost hidden in chronicles. She was the noble bride who gave Vlad legitimacy, the mother who passed his shadow into the future, and the silent witness to his fall. She stands in history, not as a queen draped in glory, but as a woman whose very bloodline both raised and destroyed the Impaler. Her life was a chain of iron, binding, unbreakable, and destined to drag Vlad deeper into the darkness. In the cold halls of memory, she remains the second bride of Dracula, the mother of cruelty reborn. By the time Vlad Tepes took his third wife, the fires of his life were already burning low. His name was feared from the Danube to the gates of Constantinople, his enemies circling like vultures above a dying lion. Yet even in the twilight of his reign, he forged one last union, a marriage that bound him not only to a woman, but to betrayal itself. Her name was Ilona Nelipic, cousin to King Matthias Corvinus of Hungary. She was young, noble, and bound by family ties to the very man who had once imprisoned Vlad. The match was political, like so many in those days, but it carried a cruel irony. Ilona was kin to the betrayer who had shattered Vlad's ambitions. And yet fate wove her into the Impaler's story. Ilona entered his world as his final bride, a figure of grace and silence in the court of a man haunted by war. Unlike Anastasia, who had given him his first heirs, and Jusztina, whose bloodline produced Minea the Evil, Ilona would give him only one child, a daughter, Zaleska. A daughter in a world of daggers. Zaleska's name flickers faintly in the chronicles, as though history itself conspired to erase her. But the presence of a daughter adds a new layer of tragedy to Vlad's tale. A prince who ruled through cruelty now had something fragile to protect, a bloodline far more vulnerable than iron-hearted sons. Did Ilona cradle her child within fortress walls, listening to the echo of screams from the forests of the impaled? Did she fear that her daughter's future would be cursed by her father's shadow? Ilona's marriage to Vlad was not one of passion, but of uneasy alliance. Through her he was tied once more to Hungary, the land that both offered him kingship and tightened his chains. She stood beside him in a time when his throne was slipping, his enemies multiplying, and his end drawing near. And when death finally came for Vlad Tepes, sudden, violent, and shrouded in mystery, Ilona was left behind, with only a child and a shattered legacy. Some say his enemies scattered his body, that his head was sent to the Sultan in Constantinople as proof that the Impaler was no more. If so, then Ilona's last sight of her husband was not of a prince upon a throne, but of a man broken, his legend already transforming into myth. What became of Ilona Nelipic after his death? History is silent. Perhaps she returned to the Hungarian court, her role fulfilled. Perhaps she vanished into the mist, a widow carrying the burden of a cursed name. And what of her daughter Zaleska? Did she grow into obscurity, or was she consumed by the shadows of her father's legacy? Some later legends whisper of a woman tied to vampiric myths, a daughter of Dracula, whose story became entangled with the birth of Gothic horror itself. Ilona remains the most tragic of Vlad's wives. She did not leap into rivers to escape her fate, nor did she raise kings steeped in cruelty. Instead, she gave him his last fragile heir and stood alone when his reign crumbled into blood and ashes. In her silence, in her widowhood, lies a haunting truth. The Impaler's brutality could conquer armies, but it could not shield the women closest to him from despair. She was the last queen of shadows, the final bride of Dracula. And in the darkness of history, Ilona Nelipic lingers like a ghost, a reminder that even monsters have hearts, and even tyrants leave behind widows who must walk alone through the ruins of legend. And now, for our last chapter, we uncover Dracula's true love. Her name was Veronica, a Romanian woman whose beauty and courage were whispered about in the villages surrounding Poenari Castle. She was not a princess, not a noblewoman, but something far more dangerous to a man like Vlad Tepes, a force that could stir his heart where ambition and cruelty could not. While the world knew him as the Impaler, and his wives tied him to power and alliances, it was Veronica who commanded the secret chambers of his soul. Villagers often reported seeing Vlad riding through the forests at night, alone. Cloaked in darkness, he would gallop his horse along the winding Carpathian paths, disappearing into the shadows, only to return at dawn with the cold glint of the Impaler in his eyes. But it was said these midnight rides were not patrols of fear or vengeance. They were pilgrimages to her. Veronica became his hidden world, the one spark of tenderness in a life ruled by blood. From this forbidden love came a son, a child who carried the same piercing gaze, the same iron will, and the very presence of his father's legend. He was Vlad Drac IV, named for the dynasty of darkness he inherited. Unlike the children from his formal marriages, this son was born in secrecy, a shadow prince whose existence only Veronica and Vlad fully knew. The boy was said to ride alongside his father under the moonlight, his laughter ringing through the forests, echoing like a reminder that even a monster craves connection. Veronica's love was more than passion, it was rebellion. She defied the world of politics, the chains of dynastic duty, and even the terrifying power of Vlad himself. In her eyes, he was not a tyrant or an impaler, he was simply Vlad, a man capable of tenderness when all else failed. And in his arms, she became the only woman to tame the darkness within the Prince of Wallachia. Yet their love was doomed to secrecy. Historians never recorded Veronica's name. She exists only in rumor, in the whispers carried on the mountain winds. But through her, Vlad left behind a son who bore both his name and his fire, a living testament to a love that history dared not see. In the shadowed forests of Wallachia, where wolves howl and the mist clings to the trees, the story of Vlad and Veronica survives, a tale of a hidden heart beating behind the legend of terror, proof that even Dracula the Impaler was not immune to the quiet power of love. And so, among wives of bloodlines and political chains, and amid castles drenched in fear, it was Veronica who claimed a place no one else could. The true love of Dracula, the mother of the hidden prince, the keeper of the man behind the myth. Through walls of stone and forests of shadow, the story of Vlad Tepes is not only one of terror, but of women. Anastasia, Jusztina, Ilona, each a queen, a mother, a shadow in his court, shaping his legacy in ways history barely remembers. And then there was Veronica, his secret love, the only heart capable of stirring tenderness in the Impaler. From political alliances to hidden passions, from heirs of cruelty to a son born in secrecy, these women carried pieces of Vlad with them. Pieces of the man behind the legend, the prince behind the myth, the darkness behind Dracula. They were forgotten, they were silenced. Yet their stories linger, haunting the forests of Wallachia, whispering that even monsters crave love, and even tyrants leave hearts behind. The Impaler may be eternal in fear, but his love and the women who shaped it are eternal in shadow.